Sarah Chen had always been small for her age. At 19, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, she often disappeared in crowds. Her delicate hands seemed more suited for playing piano than gripping the cold steel of military equipment. Yet here she was, standing in the morning mist of Fort Benning, Georgia, staring at the weapon that would change everything. The drill sergeant's voice cut through the dawn air like a blade. "This here is not just a rifle, recruits. This is precision. This is responsibility. This is the difference between success and failure at distances most of you can't even imagine." Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the Barrett M82A1. The 50 caliber sniper rifle weighed nearly 30 pounds, almost a quarter of her own body weight. Around her, the other recruits in the advanced marksmanship program shifted nervously. Most were men, tall and broad-shouldered, who made the massive weapon look manageable in their hands. Sarah felt like a child holding her father's tool. "Shun." The sergeant's bark made her spine straighten. "You think you can handle that equipment?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah could feel 20 pairs of eyes on her, measuring, judging, waiting for her to crumble. She had heard the whispers since arriving at the program 3 days ago. "What's a girl like that doing here? She looks like she should be in college, not combat training. The rifle's bigger than she is." "Yes, Sergeant," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The truth was more complicated. Sarah hadn't chosen this path out of some childhood dream of military glory. She hadn't grown up playing war games or dreaming of heroic battles. Her story began in a place far from any battlefield, in the quiet suburbs of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Her father, David Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1970s with nothing but a suitcase and determination. He worked 3 jobs to put himself through engineering school, eventually landing a position at a medical device company. Her mother, Linda, was a high school math teacher who spent her evenings tutoring struggling students for free. They had built a comfortable middle-class life through sacrifice and relentless hard work. Sarah grew up in this world of quiet achievement and humble expectations. She excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and physics. Her parents had modest dreams for her. Perhaps she would become a doctor or an engineer like her father. The military was never part of the conversation in the Chun household. Everything changed during her junior year of high school. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March, delivered by a young soldier in dress uniform who stood awkwardly on their front porch. Sarah's older brother, Michael, had been killed in Afghanistan. An IED had destroyed his convoy while he was delivering medical supplies to a remote village. The funeral was a blur of folded flags and rifle salutes. Sarah sat in the front pew, watching her parents age 10 years in 10 days. Her father, usually so composed and logical, wept openly. Her mother stopped teaching, stopped tutoring, stopped getting out of bed for weeks. In the months that followed, Sarah found herself drawn to Michael's old room, now preserved exactly as he had left it. Among his belongings, she discovered something that surprised her: journals filled with detailed observations about ballistics, wind patterns, and precision shooting. Michael had been passionate about marksmanship, though he had never served in a combat role. He had written extensively about the science behind long-distance shooting, the mathematical calculations required, the patience and discipline needed. "It's not about violence," he had written in one entry. "It's about precision. It's about understanding physics so completely that you can predict exactly where a projectile will be at any given moment, accounting for gravity, wind, temperature, even the rotation of the Earth. It's pure science applied to achieve an outcome." Sarah began to read everything Michael had written. She discovered he had won several civilian shooting competitions before enlisting. His notebooks contained detailed diagrams of rifle mechanics, calculations for bullet drop at various distances, and philosophical reflections on the responsibility that came with such skills. The ability to hit a target at extreme distance isn't just technical skill, one passage read. It's about being trusted with something precious, the knowledge that your precision could save lives or change outcomes. It's about being given equipment that amplifies human capability and using it for something greater than yourself. These words planted a seed in Sarah's mind. As she struggled through her senior year, watching her parents slowly rebuild their shattered world, she began to form an idea that seemed impossible but felt increasingly necessary. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, was surprised when Sarah scheduled a meeting in early fall of her senior year. Sarah had been accepted to several universities with strong engineering programs. Her grades were excellent, her test scores impressive. She seemed destined for a conventional path of academic success. "I want to join the military," Sarah announced without preamble. Mrs. Patterson blinked. "Sarah, honey, are you sure? You have so many options. Your parents have worked so hard to give you opportunities." "They worked hard to give me the freedom to choose," Sarah replied quietly. "This is my choice." The conversation with her parents was one of the most difficult of her life. They sat at the kitchen table where she had done homework for 12 years, where they had celebrated her achievements and comforted her disappointments. The same table where they had received the news about Michael. "You want a what?" her father asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to join the army. I want to be trained in precision marksmanship." Her mother's reaction was immediate and fierce. "Absolutely not. We've already lost one child to that madness. I won't lose another." The argument that followed was painful but necessary. Sarah tried to explain what she had discovered in Michael's writings, how she had begun to understand that precision shooting was as much about science as it was about military application. She talked about wanting to honor her brother's memory, about feeling called to develop skills that could protect others. "You don't understand what you're asking," her father said, his engineering mind immediately going to practical concerns. "You're talking about weapons training. About putting yourself in harm's way. About becoming part of a system that took Michael from us," her mother finished, tears streaming down her face. Sarah reached across the table and took both their hands. "No. I'm talking about becoming part of a system that could prevent other families from losing what we lost. Michael believed that precision at distance could save lives. He believed that having people with the right skills in the right places could change outcomes." The conversation continued late into the night. Sarah showed them Michael's journals, read them passages about the science and responsibility of precision shooting. She talked about her own aptitude for mathematics and physics, how she believed she could excel in this field. Gradually, her parents began to understand. This wasn't about revenge or reckless heroism. This was about their daughter finding a way to channel her grief and her talents into something meaningful. It was about her belief that she could develop skills that might prevent other families from experiencing their loss. The process of enlisting was more complicated than Sarah had expected. Her slight build and quiet demeanor initially made recruiters skeptical. But her test scores were exceptional, particularly in the areas of spatial reasoning and mathematical calculation that were crucial for precision shooting. The recruiter, Sergeant First Class Martinez, reviewed her file with growing interest. "Your scores are impressive, Chen. But sniper training isn't just about being smart. It's about physical endurance, mental toughness, and the ability to function under extreme stress." "I understand, Sergeant. I'm willing to work harder than anyone else to prove I belong." Martinez looked at her for a long moment. "Why do you want this? Really?" Sarah told him about Michael, about the journals, about her belief that precision shooting was a science that could be used to protect others. She talked about wanting to honor her brother's memory while pursuing her own path. "It's not about the weapon itself," she explained. "It's about being trusted with equipment that can make a difference at distances where others can't help. It's about being precise enough to save lives." Martinez nodded slowly. "That's the first time I've heard someone describe it that way. Most recruits talk about glory or excitement. You're talking about responsibility." The paperwork was completed on a gray November morning. Sarah's parents drove her to the recruitment office, their faces a mixture of pride and terror. Her mother hugged her for a long time in the parking lot. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered. "Promise me you'll remember that you're not just representing yourself. You're carrying all our hopes with you." "I promise, Mom. I'll make you proud." Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood was brutal. Sarah's small frame worked against her in many traditional military exercises. She struggled with some of the physical requirements, particularly those involving upper body strength. But she excelled in areas that surprised her instructors. Her performance on the rifle range was exceptional from the beginning. While other recruits struggled with basic marksmanship, Sarah seemed to have an intuitive understanding of sight alignment, breathing control, and trigger discipline. Her shooting coach, Staff Sergeant Williams, noticed her potential immediately. "Chen, where did you learn to shoot like that?" I didn't, Sergeant. This is the first time I've ever fired a rifle. Williams shook his head in amazement. Natural talent like this comes along maybe once in 1,000 recruits. Have you given any thought to specialized training? It was the first indication that Sarah's unusual journey was just beginning. Word of her shooting ability spread through the training command. By the end of basic training, she was being recruited for the Advanced Marksmanship Program, an elite course that trains soldiers for precision shooting roles. The night before leaving for Fort Benning, Sarah called her parents. Her father's voice was warm with pride. Michael would be amazed, sweetheart. You're already exceeding anything he dreamed of. I'm scared, Dad. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't handle the pressure? Fear is just information, her father replied, using a phrase Michael had often repeated. It tells you that what you're doing matters. Use that information to make yourself better. Now, standing in the Georgia morning with the massive rifle in her hands, Sarah remembered those words. The Barrett M82A1 felt impossibly heavy, but she forced herself to appreciate its engineering. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a precision instrument capable of placing a projectile exactly where intended at distances approaching 2 miles. The first week of training was devoted to understanding the equipment. Sarah learned that the Barrett fired .50 caliber BMG rounds, each bullet weighing over an ounce and traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second. The rifle itself was a marvel of engineering, with a sophisticated recoil system that made the massive weapon manageable for even smaller shooters. But understanding the equipment was only the beginning. The real challenge was learning to use it effectively at extreme distances. Sarah discovered that shooting at ranges beyond a mile required mastery of variables that most people never considered. Wind was the most complex factor. At 2,000 meters, a 10-mile-per-hour crosswind could push a bullet several feet off target. Students learned to read wind patterns at multiple points along the bullet's path, not just at the firing position. They studied the movement of grass, the behavior of mirage, the way dust and debris moved at different levels. Temperature affected everything from the burning rate of propellant to the density of air through which the bullet traveled. Humidity changed air density. Barometric pressure influenced trajectory. Even the rotation of the Earth, the Coriolis effect, became a factor at extreme distances. Sarah found herself fascinated by these calculations. While other students struggled with the mathematics involved, she embraced the complexity. Each shot became an equation to solve, a scientific problem that required precise measurement and careful calculation. Her instructor, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, was a 20-year veteran who had served multiple combat tours. He was initially skeptical of the small young woman who seemed more like a college student than a soldier. But Sarah's consistent performance on the range gradually earned his respect. "Shen, you're thinking about this the right way," he said after she had successfully engaged targets at 1,500 meters. Too many shooters try to muscle their way through long-distance shooting. They think it's about having steady hands or strong nerves. But you understand it's about precise measurement and careful calculation. My father always taught me that any problem can be solved if you break it down into small enough pieces, Sarah replied. Every shot is just a series of small problems that need to be solved in sequence. The physical challenges remained significant. The Barrett rifle was designed for larger shooters, and Sarah had to work twice as hard to achieve the same level of comfort and control. She spent extra hours in the gym, building the specific muscle groups needed to handle the weapon effectively. But her mental approach set her apart. While other students focused on hitting targets, Sarah focused on understanding why her shots went where they did. She kept detailed logs of every shot, recording weather conditions, ammunition temperature, barrel temperature, and dozens of other variables. "You're treating this like a science experiment," Rodriguez observed. "Isn't it?" Sarah replied. "Every shot is an experiment. If I can understand all the variables, I can predict the outcome." By the end of the first month, Sarah was consistently outperforming students who had been in the program longer. Her shooting scores were exceptional, but, more importantly, she demonstrated an understanding of the underlying principles that impressed her instructors. The real test came during her first long-distance qualification. Students were required to engage targets at ranges from 800 to 2,000 meters, under various weather conditions, using different types of ammunition. Sarah's small hands trembled slightly as she prepared for the test, but her mind was clear and focused. The first target was at 800 meters, a challenging shot, but well within the range she had been practicing. Sarah went through her pre-shot routine methodically: range estimation, wind reading, calculation of bullet drop, adjustment of her scope. She controlled her breathing, aligned her sights, and squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The bullet struck the target dead center. A perfect hit. The second target was at 1,200 meters. At this distance, the effects of wind and bullet drop became much more significant. Sarah spent several minutes studying the mirage patterns between her position and the target, estimating wind speed at different points along the bullet's path. Another perfect hit. As the targets moved to greater and greater distances, Sarah's performance remained consistent. At 1,800 meters, she was shooting at a target nearly a mile away. The bullet took over 2 seconds to reach its destination, traveling in an arc that peaked almost 20 feet above the target before dropping down to impact exactly where she aimed. The final target was at 2,000 meters, the maximum range for this qualification. At this distance, she was pushing the limits of both the equipment and her own skills. The target appeared as little more than a speck through her scope. The slightest error in calculation or execution would result in a miss by several feet. Sarah took her time, double-checking every calculation. She considered not just the current wind conditions, but how they might change during the bullet's 2.5-second flight time. She factored in the slight uphill angle to the target, the temperature of her ammunition, even the fact that the Earth would rotate slightly during the bullet's flight. When she was satisfied with her calculations, she settled into her shooting position and began her breathing routine. The scope's crosshairs settled on the exact point she had selected. Her finger applied steady pressure to the trigger until the rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. Through her scope, she watched the target for what seemed like an eternity. Then, in the distance, she saw the telltale puff of dust that indicated a hit. Rodriguez lowered his binoculars with a look of amazement. Dead center, Chen. At 2,000 meters, that's a hell of a shot. Sarah felt a surge of emotion that surprised her. This wasn't just about hitting a target, it was about proving to herself that she could master something Michael had only dreamed of. It was about showing that size and strength weren't the only measures of capability. It was about honoring her brother's memory while forging her own path. That evening, she called home to share the news with her parents. Her mother's voice was filled with pride and wonder. 2,000 meters? Sweetheart, that's over a mile away. It's exactly 1.24 miles, Mom. But it's not about the distance. It's about proving that precision and knowledge can overcome any limitation. Her father was characteristically practical. What happens next? Will you continue with more advanced training? That's what I'm hoping for, Dad. Rodriguez says there are opportunities for even more specialized training. Longer distances, more complex scenarios. But I'll only get those opportunities if I prove I can handle the responsibility. As she hung up the phone, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few months. She had gone from being a quiet college-bound teenager to a soldier who could accurately engage targets at distances most people couldn't even see. But she also understood that this was just the beginning. The real test would come not on a controlled range with perfect conditions, but in situations where her skills could make the difference between life and death. She would need to prove not just that she could hit targets, but that she could be trusted with the tremendous responsibility that came with such capabilities. The Barrett rifle had become more than just equipment to her. It was a tool that amplified human precision and judgment. In the right hands, with the right training, it could save lives and change outcomes. Sarah was determined to prove that her hands were the right hands. That night, she wrote in a journal she had started keeping, inspired by Michael's example. The rifle itself isn't the weapon, she wrote. Knowledge is the weapon. Precision is the weapon. Responsibility is the weapon. The rifle is just the equipment that allows me to apply these weapons at distance. She was beginning to understand that her journey was about more than just learning to shoot. It was about becoming someone who could be trusted with capabilities that others couldn't imagine. It was about proving that true strength came not from physical size but from mental precision and emotional discipline. The next phase of her training would push her even further, testing not just her shooting skills but her ability to function under pressure, to make critical decisions, and to handle the weight of responsibility that came with her unique capabilities. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah thought about the 2,000-meter shot she had made that day. It represented more than just technical achievement, it was proof that she was on the right path, that she was becoming the person Michael had believed she could be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, longer distances, and greater responsibility. But tonight, she felt ready for whatever came next. 6 months into the advanced marksmanship program, Sarah Chen had established herself as one of the most promising students in the program's history. Her shooting scores were consistently in the top percentile, but, more importantly, she had developed an intuitive understanding of long-distance ballistics that impressed even veteran instructors. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Sarah arrived at the range before dawn, as was her habit, to practice in the calm air conditions that preceded sunrise. The Georgia landscape was shrouded in mist, creating the perfect environment for studying mirage patterns and wind detection. She was setting up her equipment when Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached with a man she didn't recognize. The stranger wore civilian clothes but carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of military experience. He was tall, weathered, with the kind of eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "Chen, I'd like you to meet Colonel Harrison," Rodriguez said. "He's here to observe your training." Sarah stood at attention, uncertain why a colonel would be interested in watching a routine practice session. Harrison studied her for a moment, taking in her small frame and youthful appearance. "At ease, soldier," he said quietly. "Rodriguez tells me you've been making some impressive shots. I'd like to see what you can do." What followed was unlike any shooting session Sarah had experienced. Instead of engaging stationary targets at known distances, Harrison set up scenarios that required her to estimate ranges, account for unusual wind conditions, and adapt to changing situations in real time. Targets don't always cooperate in the real world, he explained as he positioned targets at unknown distances throughout the range complex. Sometimes you don't have time for extensive calculations. Sometimes the conditions change while your bullet is in flight. Sarah found herself challenged in ways she hadn't expected. Her first shot at an unknown distance target missed by several inches, a significant error by her standards. But, instead of being discouraged, she felt energized by the complexity of the problem. "Range estimation is critical," Harrison observed. At extreme distances, a 20-meter error in range estimation can cause a complete miss, no matter how perfect your wind reading or shooting technique. Over the next several hours, Sarah worked through scenario after scenario. Some required rapid engagement of multiple targets at different distances. Others involved shooting through varying wind conditions that changed significantly along the bullet's path. Each challenge pushed her skills in new directions. The most difficult scenario came late in the morning. Harrison had positioned a target at an estimated distance of 2,200 meters, significantly beyond anything Sarah had attempted before. The target was partially obscured by terrain features, and the wind conditions were complex, with different patterns at various elevations. "This is similar to conditions you might encounter in Afghanistan or other mountainous terrain," Harrison explained. "The wind patterns are unpredictable because of the terrain features. Your target is partially concealed. And you're shooting at a distance that pushes the absolute limits of your equipment." Sarah studied the target through her scope, analyzing every detail she could observe. The distance was at the extreme edge of her rifle's effective range. The target appeared as little more than a dark speck, barely visible even at maximum magnification. The wind patterns were unlike anything she had encountered on a conventional range. She spent nearly 20 minutes analyzing the shot, using every technique she had learned. Range estimation became critical. At this distance, even a small error would cause her bullet to fall short or sail over the target entirely. She studied the mirage patterns between her position and the target, noting how they changed at different elevations due to the terrain features. The wind was the most complex variable. At her shooting position, there was barely any breeze. But she could see grass and vegetation moving differently at various points along the bullet's path. Some areas showed steady crosswinds, while others appeared calm. She had to estimate not just the current wind conditions, but how they might change during the nearly 3 seconds it would take for her bullet to reach the target. "Take your time," Harrison said quietly. "In real situations, you might have only seconds to make this shot. But today is about learning what's possible when you have time to do everything right." Sarah made her final calculations and settled into her shooting position. At this distance, she was pushing beyond anything she had attempted before. The mathematical calculations were at the edge of her abilities. The slightest error in any variable, range estimation, wind reading, or shooting technique, would result in a complete miss. She controlled her breathing and aligned her sights with extraordinary precision. The crosshairs settled on a point slightly above and to the left of the target, compensating for bullet drop and wind deflection. When she was satisfied with her sight picture, she began her trigger squeeze, applying steady pressure until the rifle fired. Through her scope, she watched the target for what seemed like an eternity. At 2,200 meters, it took nearly 3 seconds for the bullet to travel from her rifle to the target. During that time, she held her breath, knowing that this shot represented the absolute edge of her capabilities. Then, she saw it, a small puff of dust at the target location indicating an impact. Rodriguez, watching through high-powered binoculars, confirmed what she hoped she had seen. "Hit," he announced with amazement in his voice. "Chen, that's a 2,200-meter shot with a partial target and complex wind conditions. That's remarkable shooting by any standard." Harrison lowered his own binoculars and looked at Sarah with new respect. "How did you calculate the wind correction for that shot?" Sarah explained her analysis, describing how she had estimated wind patterns at different elevations and distances based on vegetation movement and mirage patterns. She detailed her range estimation techniques and the mathematical calculations she had used to determine bullet drop and wind deflection. Harrison listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed his deep understanding of long-distance ballistics. When Sarah finished her explanation, he nodded thoughtfully. "Impressive work. But, I need to ask you something important. Why are you here? Why did you choose this path?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She found herself telling Harrison about Michael, about the journals that had inspired her interest in precision shooting, about her belief that these skills could be used to protect others. "It's not about the weapons themselves," she explained. "It's about being precise enough to make a difference when others can't. It's about being trusted with capabilities that require absolute responsibility." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of experience. "What if I told you there was an opportunity to take your training to the next level? Something beyond conventional sniper training? I'd want to know more, sir. There's a program that most people have never heard of. It's designed to develop capabilities for situations where conventional approaches aren't sufficient. Extreme long-distance precision shooting. Distances that most people would consider impossible." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. "How long distance are we talking about, sir?" "The current world record for a confirmed sniper kill is 3,540 meters, just over 2 miles. The program I'm talking about is working to develop capabilities beyond that. We're talking about shots at distances where you're limited not by your skills or your equipment, but by the curvature of the earth itself." The implications of what Harrison was describing were staggering. Shooting at distances beyond 2 miles would require mastery of variables that most marksmen never even considered. At such ranges, even the rotation of the Earth became a significant factor affecting bullet trajectory. "Why me?" Sarah asked. "Because you approach this as a science, not just a skill. Because you understand that precision shooting at extreme distances is about knowledge and calculation, not just natural ability. And, because Rodriguez tells me you have the mental discipline to handle the responsibility that comes with such capabilities." Harrison explained that the program was highly classified and extremely selective. Only a handful of soldiers were chosen each year, and many of those didn't complete the training successfully. The physical and mental demands were extraordinary, and the level of precision required was beyond what most people could achieve. The training takes place at a specialized facility in Colorado. You'll work with equipment that pushes the absolute boundaries of what's technically possible. But, more importantly, you'll learn to think about precision shooting in ways that go beyond anything you've experienced so far. Sarah thought about her parents, about the promise she had made to make them proud. She thought about Michael's journals and his belief that precision shooting was a science that could be used to protect others. This opportunity represented everything she had been working toward. "What would I need to do to qualify for the program?" "You've already done it. That 2,200-meter shot under complex conditions demonstrates the kind of potential we're looking for. But, I need to be clear about what you're agreeing to. This isn't just advanced training, it's preparation for missions where your skills could be the difference between success and failure of critical operations." The weight of what Harrison was offering settled on Sarah like a physical force. This wasn't just about becoming a better marksman, it was about becoming someone who could be called upon to perform missions that others couldn't even attempt.
I understand, sir. When would the training begin?
If you accept, you'll ship out to Colorado in 2 weeks.
The training cycle is 6 months long, and it's unlike anything you've experienced.
You'll be working with rifles and ammunition that aren't available anywhere else. You'll learn ballistic calculations that account for variables most shooters never even consider. And you'll be expected to achieve levels of precision that push the absolute limits of what's humanly possible.
That evening, Sarah called her parents to discuss the opportunity.
The conversation was difficult. Her mother immediately worried about the increased danger that would come with such specialized training, while her father was fascinated by the technical challenges involved. "Sweetheart, this sounds incredibly dangerous," her mother said, her voice tight with concern.
"You're already doing more than we ever imagined. Why do you need to push it even further?" "Because I can, Mom.
Because I have abilities that could be used to protect people, and I think I have a responsibility to develop those abilities as far as possible."
Her father's engineering background made him appreciate the technical complexity of what Sarah was describing. The mathematics involved in shooting at those distances must be extraordinary. The number of variables you'd have to account for.
"That's exactly why I want to do this, Dad. It's the ultimate application of physics and mathematics to achieve a precise outcome.
It's everything you taught me about breaking complex problems down into solvable pieces." The conversation continued late into the night.
Eventually, her parents came to understand that this opportunity represented the culmination of everything Sarah had been working toward. It was a chance to honor Michael's memory while pushing the boundaries of what she could achieve.
"We trust your judgment, sweetheart," her father said finally. "You've already exceeded every expectation we had.
If you believe this is the right path, then we support you completely." 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself on a plane to Colorado, carrying orders that authorized her to participate in a program whose very existence was classified. As the plane climbed through the clouds above Georgia, she reflected on how far she had come from the quiet suburban teenager who had first read her brother's journals.
The facility in Colorado was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen.
Located at high altitude in the Rocky Mountains, it featured shooting ranges that extended for miles across mountain valleys. The equipment available there went far beyond anything she had used before: rifles that cost more than most people's cars, ammunition that was manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, and computer systems that could calculate ballistic solutions for variables she had never even considered. Her instructor at the new facility was Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, a man whose reputation in the precision shooting community was legendary. He had been involved in developing the techniques and equipment that pushed long-distance shooting beyond what anyone had thought possible. "Forget everything you think you know about extreme long-distance shooting," he told Sarah during her first briefing.
"At the distances we work with here, conventional ballistic calculations break down.
You'll be dealing with variables that most people don't even know exist."
The first week of training was devoted entirely to theoretical study. Sarah learned about advanced ballistic concepts that went far beyond anything covered in conventional sniper training.
She studied how the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth, affected bullet trajectory at extreme distances. She learned about the Magnus effect, which caused spinning bullets to drift in complex patterns due to air resistance. She studied how temperature gradients at different altitudes could affect bullet flight paths. Most challenging of all, she learned about the limitations imposed by the Earth's curvature itself. At distances beyond 3,000 meters, the curvature of the Earth meant that conventional line-of-sight aiming became impossible. Bullets had to be fired in high arcs that peaked hundreds of feet above the intended target before dropping down to impact. "At the distances you'll be working with, you're not just a marksman," Martinez explained.
"You're an applied physicist.
Every shot requires calculations that account for dozens of variables, many of which change continuously during the bullet's flight time."
The equipment at the Colorado facility was extraordinary.
Sarah was introduced to rifles that had been specially modified to achieve levels of accuracy that commercial weapons couldn't match. The barrels were manufactured to tolerances measured in fractions of thousandths of an inch.
The actions were designed to eliminate even microscopic amounts of play or vibration.
The scopes featured optical systems that could resolve details at distances where targets appeared as mere specks to the naked eye. But the most impressive aspect of the facility was the range complex itself. The shooting positions were located on mountain peaks, while targets could be positioned on distant mountainsides at ranges extending beyond 4,000 meters, nearly 2.5 miles. The elevation changes between shooting positions and targets added another layer of complexity to the ballistic calculations.
Sarah's first attempts at these extreme distances were humbling.
Despite her success at more conventional ranges, she found herself struggling with the complexity of the calculations required. The number of variables that had to be considered was staggering, and the slightest error in any one factor could cause a complete miss. "Don't be discouraged," Martinez told her after a particularly frustrating session. "You're trying to master in weeks what took me years to develop.
The important thing is that you're thinking about the problems correctly.
Your mathematical approach is exactly what we need, you just need time to develop the intuition that comes with experience." Gradually, Sarah began to adapt to the demands of extreme long-distance shooting. She learned to use computer programs that could calculate ballistic solutions accounting for dozens of variables simultaneously. She developed techniques for estimating wind conditions at multiple elevations and distances using telescope observations of terrain features miles away. Most importantly, she learned to think about shooting in entirely new ways. At conventional distances, shooting was about controlling variables and executing technique consistently. At extreme distances, it became an exercise in prediction and adaptation. Conditions changed during the bullet's flight time, which could extend to 4 or 5 seconds. Sarah had to learn not just what conditions were at the moment of firing, but what they would be when her bullet finally reached the target. The breakthrough came during her 6th week at the facility. Sarah had been consistently achieving hits at distances up to 3,200 meters, but had struggled with longer shots. On this particular morning, conditions were perfect: clear air, stable winds, and excellent visibility. Martinez positioned a target at 3,800 meters, nearly 2.4 miles away. At this distance, the target was barely visible even through the highest powered scopes available. The bullet would take over 4 seconds to reach the target and would arc to a peak height of nearly 300 feet above the intended impact point. Sarah spent over an hour analyzing the shot, using every tool and technique available to her. She studied satellite imagery of the terrain between her position and the target to understand how geographical features might affect wind patterns.
She used laser rangefinders to precisely measure the distance and elevation angle.
She consulted weather data from multiple monitoring stations to understand atmospheric conditions at different altitudes along the bullet's path. The mathematical calculations required to solve this shot were extraordinarily complex. Sarah had to account not just for bullet drop and wind deflection, but for the Coriolis effect, the Magnus effect, and atmospheric conditions that varied with altitude.
She had to predict how these conditions might change during the bullet's 4-second flight time.
When she was finally satisfied with her calculations, Sarah settled into her shooting position with the highly modified rifle that had been specifically configured for such extreme shots. The weapon was significantly different from the Barrett she had started with: longer, heavier, and equipped with specialized ammunition that had been manufactured to exact specifications. Through her scope, the target was the rooftop was silent except for the distant hum of city traffic 3.5 kilometers below. Sarah Chen lay prone behind her rifle, studying the target through her scope as the sun began to set over the Middle Eastern city. This was no training exercise, lives depended on the precision of her next shot. The target was a terrorist leader named Qasim al-Rashid, who had been tracked to a meeting in a building across the urban landscape. Intelligence indicated he was planning an imminent attack on a civilian marketplace that would kill hundreds of innocent people. Conventional assault was impossible due to the heavy civilian population surrounding the target building, and drone strikes carried too much risk of collateral damage. Sarah's mission was to eliminate al-Rashid with a single precision shot from an unprecedented distance of 3,547 meters, nearly 2.2 miles. The shot would break the existing world record for confirmed sniper kills, but records weren't on Sarah's mind. She was focused entirely on the complex calculations required to place her bullet exactly where it needed to go. The urban environment created challenges unlike anything she had faced in training. Wind patterns were chaotic, deflected and channeled by buildings in unpredictable ways. Temperature variations between the sun-heated concrete and shadowed areas created thermal columns that could deflect a bullet's path. Even the time of day mattered. As the sun set, changing light conditions would affect her ability to precisely identify her target.
Sarah's spotter, Sergeant First Class David Park, lay beside her with high-powered observation equipment.
Park was a veteran of dozens of similar operations and had worked with some of the military's best precision shooters. He had initially been skeptical when he learned his new partner was a 20-year-old woman who looked more like a college student than a special operations sniper. That skepticism had evaporated during their first training exercises together. Park had watched Sarah consistently achieve shots that he had seen seasoned veterans struggle with. More importantly, he had observed her methodical approach to problem solving and her absolute dedication to getting every detail right. "Target is still in position," Park reported quietly, studying the distant building through his spotting scope. "Third floor, window facing northwest. But I'm seeing more activity in adjacent rooms. Civilian presence is higher than expected." Sarah absorbed this information while continuing her environmental analysis. Through her scope, she could see Al-Rashid moving occasionally past the window of his meeting room. But the target window was partially obscured by architectural features, and there were other windows nearby where innocent people might be present. The margin for error was essentially zero. At this distance, even a perfect shot would have an inherent accuracy limitation measured in inches. Any miscalculation or execution error could result in missing the intended target and potentially hitting an innocent person. "Wind conditions?" Sarah asked, not taking her eye from the scope. Park consulted his instruments and observed environmental indicators throughout the urban landscape. "Variable and complex. I'm seeing steady 8-mile-per-hour crosswinds at our position, but the patterns change dramatically as you track toward the target. There are several thermal columns from heated buildings that will affect the bullet path." Sarah had been analyzing these same conditions for the past 40 minutes, but she appreciated Park's independent assessment. At extreme distances, even small errors in wind estimation could cause misses measured in feet rather than inches. The mathematical calculations required for this shot were staggering in their complexity. The bullet would take just over 4 seconds to travel from Sarah's rifle to the target, during which time it would arc to a peak height of over 200 feet before dropping down to impact. During those 4 seconds, the Earth's rotation would shift the target's position by nearly an inch, a small amount under normal circumstances, but significant when precision was measured in fractions of inches. Sarah used a tablet computer to run ballistic calculations that accounted for dozens of variables: muzzle velocity, bullet weight and ballistic coefficient, air temperature and humidity at multiple altitudes, barometric pressure, wind speed and direction at various points along the bullet's path, the Coriolis effect, the Magnus effect, and even the gravitational differences caused by altitude variations. But the computer calculations were only the starting point. Sarah's training had taught her that extreme long-distance shooting required intuition and adaptability that went beyond mathematical formulas. She had to interpret environmental conditions that no computer could fully analyze and make adjustments based on experience and judgment. "I need to hold for another 10 minutes, Sarah announced. "I want to observe the wind patterns through one more cycle, and the lighting conditions will be better as the sun drops further." Park nodded, understanding that Sarah's patience and attention to detail were critical to mission success. In training, they had time for multiple attempts if conditions weren't perfect. In operational situations, there was usually only one opportunity to get everything right. During the wait, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been struggling with the 30-pound weight of a Barrett rifle on a training range in Georgia. Now she was preparing to attempt one of the longest precision shots in military history, using skills that pushed the absolute boundaries of human capability. The personal cost had been significant. The demands of specialized training and operational assignments had strained her relationships with friends and family. Her parents worried constantly about her safety, though they were proud of her achievements. The few romantic relationships she had attempted couldn't survive the secretive nature of her work and her absolute dedication to developing her capabilities. But Sarah had found something in precision shooting that fulfilled her in ways nothing else could. The combination of scientific knowledge, technical skill, and life-or-death responsibility created challenges that demanded everything she had to give. She was using her mind and her training to protect innocent people in ways that others couldn't. Movement in the target window, Park reported. Al-Rashid is back in position. Civilian activity in adjacent areas appears to have decreased. Sarah studied the target through her scope, confirming Park's observations. Al-Rashid was standing near the window, apparently engaged in conversation with others in the room. The shot would be challenging but feasible if she could execute everything perfectly. The final preparations took another 15 minutes. Sarah checked and rechecked every calculation, verified her equipment settings, and analyzed current environmental conditions one last time. When she was satisfied that everything was as perfect as it could be, she settled into her final shooting position. The rifle she was using had been specially modified for extreme long-distance work. The barrel was over 30 inches long and manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch.
The action was custom-built to eliminate any mechanical play or vibration.
The scope featured optical systems that cost more than most people's cars and could resolve details at distances where targets appeared as specks to the naked eye.
The ammunition was equally specialized.
Each cartridge had been loaded to exact specifications, with bullets that were individually weighed and sorted for ballistic consistency.
The powder charges were measured to tolerances of 1/10 of a grain.
Even the brass cases had been carefully prepared to ensure consistent performance. But all the sophisticated equipment in the world couldn't substitute for the human elements of precision shooting: knowledge, skill, judgment, and the ability to execute under pressure.
Sarah's success would depend ultimately on her ability to synthesize complex information and execute perfect technique when lives were at stake.
Through her scope, she positioned the crosshairs according to her calculations. At this distance, she was aiming several feet above and to the side of her actual target to compensate for bullet drop and wind deflection. The sight picture looked completely wrong to every shooting instinct she had developed, but her mathematical analysis told her exactly where the crosshairs needed to be positioned.
"Final check," Sarah announced quietly.
Park confirmed wind conditions and target status one last time.
Conditions stable. Target in position.
No civilian activity visible in adjacent areas. You are cleared for the shot. Sarah began her breathing routine, settling into the controlled respiration pattern that would minimize body movement during the critical moment of trigger activation. She aligned her sights with extraordinary precision, knowing that even a microscopic error in sight alignment would be magnified into a significant miss at this distance.
The trigger squeeze began slowly and smoothly. Sarah applied steady pressure, focusing entirely on maintaining perfect sight alignment while the trigger moved rearward.
The moment of firing had to occur at the natural respiratory pause between breaths, when her body was most stable. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the urban landscape. Through her scope, Sarah watched the distant building where her target was located, knowing it would be over 4 seconds before she could determine the outcome of her shot.
Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited.
At this distance, there was no way to track the bullet's flight, it was moving too fast and the range was too great. Success or failure would be determined by whether Al-Rashid was still standing when the bullet completed its long arc through the air. 4.5 seconds after firing, Sarah saw movement in the target window. But, instead of the decisive impact she expected, she observed Al-Rashid stepping back from the window, very much alive and apparently unharmed. "Miss," Park confirmed through his spotting scope. No impact visible in the target area. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. After all her training, all her preparation, all the confidence built through hundreds of successful shots, she had failed when it mattered most. Somewhere in her complex calculations or execution, an error had caused her bullet to miss its intended target. The immediate tactical situation became critical. Al-Rashid and his associates, alerted by the sound of the distant gunshot, were moving rapidly away from the windows. Within seconds, the opportunity for a follow-up shot would be lost, and the terrorist leader would escape to carry out his planned attack.
"Do we have another opportunity?" Sarah asked, fighting to keep the emotion out of her voice.
Park was already scanning the building through his scope, looking for any chance of re-engaging the target.
"Negative.
They're moving to interior spaces.
Windows are clear."
The mission had failed. Despite all her training, all her preparation, all her confidence in her abilities, Sarah had missed the most important shot of her career.
Innocent people would die because she had not been precise enough when precision was absolutely critical.
The extraction from the shooting position was conducted in professional silence. Sarah and Park packed their equipment efficiently and began moving to their extraction point, following protocols that had been rehearsed dozens of times. But the weight of failure made every movement feel mechanical and purposeless. During the helicopter flight back to base, Sarah stared out the window at the city lights below, trying to understand what had gone wrong. She replayed every aspect of her shot preparation and execution, searching for the error that had caused her failure. The debrief was thorough and painful. The mission commander, Colonel Harrison, reviewed every aspect of the operation with Sarah and Park, analyzing what could be learned from the failure. Video footage and sensor data were examined to determine the cause of the miss. The ballistic analysis indicates your bullet impact was approximately 18 inches to the right of the intended target, Harrison reported. At that distance, such an error suggests a miscalculation in wind estimation or a slight error in sight alignment.
Sarah accepted the assessment without making excuses, though she remained puzzled by the miss.
Her pre-shot analysis had been thorough, her equipment was functioning perfectly, and her execution felt smooth and controlled. Yet somehow, an error had occurred that made the difference between success and failure.
"What's our intelligence on Al-Rashid's current status?" Sarah asked. "He's in the wind."
The operation failure has made him more cautious, and he's changed his patterns.
We may not get another opportunity to prevent his planned attack.
The implications of this information were devastating. Sarah's miss hadn't just resulted in a failed mission, it had potentially condemned innocent civilians to death in the attack that Al-Rashid was planning. Over the following days, Sarah struggled with depression and self-doubt that threatened to undermine everything she had achieved. She had built her identity around the belief that precise knowledge and careful execution could overcome any challenge. The mission failure forced her to confront the possibility that sometimes, even perfect preparation wasn't enough. She found herself questioning every aspect of her approach. Had she been overconfident in her abilities? Had she miscalculated some critical variable? Was she simply not as capable as everyone believed? The crisis deepened 3 days later when news reports confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Al-Rashid had successfully carried out his planned attack on a civilian marketplace, killing 47 people and wounding over 100 others. Sarah knew that her failed shot had made these deaths possible. She requested a meeting with Colonel Harrison to discuss her future in the program. "Sir, I think I should be reassigned. My failure cost innocent lives, and I'm not sure I'm mentally capable of handling this level of responsibility." Harrison studied her for a long moment before responding. "Chen, do you know how many precision shooters I've worked with over my career?" "No, sir." "Hundreds." "And do you know what separates the exceptional ones from those who wash out?" "Technical skills?" "No. The exceptional ones are those who learn from failure without being destroyed by it. Those who understand that even the best shooters miss occasionally, and that the key is to analyze what went wrong and ensure it doesn't happen again." Harrison pulled out a thick file and placed it on his desk. "This contains after-action reports from every precision shooting operation conducted over the past 5 years. Want to guess how many resulted in first-shot hits?" Sarah was surprised by the question. "I assumed most would be successful." 63%. Even our best shooters, using the most sophisticated equipment available, miss more than 1/3 of the time in operational conditions. The difference between training ranges and real-world operations is enormous. This information forced Sarah to reconsider her assumptions about precision shooting and her own capabilities. She had internalized the expectation of perfection without understanding that even exceptional performers failed regularly in operational environments. "The question isn't whether you'll miss again," Harrison continued. "The question is whether you can learn from this experience and become better because of it. Your technical skills are exceptional, and your approach to problem solving is among the best I've seen. But you need to develop the mental resilience to handle failure and continue performing under pressure." Over the following weeks, Sarah worked with military psychologists and experienced operators to develop strategies for coping with mission failure and maintaining confidence despite setbacks. She learned that elite performers in all fields, from surgery to aviation to special operations, had to develop the ability to function effectively despite the knowledge that failure was always possible. The technical analysis of her missed shot eventually revealed the likely cause of her error. High-altitude wind measurements indicated that atmospheric conditions had changed slightly during her bullet's flight time, causing a wind deflection that her calculations hadn't fully accounted for. The miss was the result of environmental factors beyond her complete control, not fundamental errors in her approach. This knowledge helped Sarah understand that precision shooting at extreme distances involved uncertainties that couldn't be completely eliminated through preparation and skill. Even perfect technique could result in misses when environmental conditions exceeded the limits of prediction and measurement. 6 weeks after the failed mission, Sarah received orders for a new assignment. Intelligence had located another high-value target in a situation that required extreme long-distance precision. The mission parameters were similar to her previous assignment, but the distance was even greater, nearly 4,000 meters. "Are you ready to get back out there?" Harrison asked as he briefed her on the new mission. Sarah considered the question carefully. The failure had been devastating, but it had also taught her important lessons about the realities of operational shooting and the mental resilience required for this work. She understood now that perfection was impossible, but that didn't mean she should stop striving for it.
Yes, sir. I'm ready. What have you learned from the last mission?
That I can't control every variable, but I can control my preparation, my execution, and my response to outcomes beyond my control. That failure is part of this work, but it doesn't define my capabilities or my worth.
Harrison nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I wanted to hear.
Your next assignment will test everything you've learned, both technically and mentally.
But I believe you're ready for it.
As Sarah prepared for her next mission, she carried with her both the confidence built through years of training and the humility learned through failure. She understood now that precision shooting wasn't just about technical perfection, it was about performing consistently well despite uncertainty, pressure, and the constant possibility of failure. The miss had been painful, but it had also made her stronger and more realistic about her capabilities. She was ready to prove that she could learn from failure and continue to perform when lives depended on her precision. The next shot would be the longest anyone had ever attempted in operational conditions. Success would require everything she had learned, everything she had overcome, and a level of mental toughness that could only be developed through facing and surviving failure. Sarah was ready to make history, not because she was perfect, but because she had learned to be exceptional despite imperfection.